Hey, it's Ben. Rahul and I started this podcast because we love hanging out with fellow trial lawyers and sharing ideas that can make us all better. And both of our firms also regularly collaborate with other lawyers across the countries in cases where we can add value. If you're interested in collaboration, or even if you just have a case or an idea that you want to bounce off us or brainstorm, Rahul and I are going to be hosting confidential case workshops the first Wednesday of each month. So here's how it works. If you have a case or an idea that you want to talk about or brainstorm with us, just send me an email to ben@elawvate.net, ELAWVATE.net, or go online to elawvate.net and submit a case workshop request. We will schedule you for a confidential 30-minute Zoom meeting where we can talk about your case to see if we can help. If you feel like there would be good value in collaborating on the case further, we can talk about that. If not, that's okay too. We enjoy helping other trial lawyers because we know someday you'd be willing to do the same for us if we needed your help. So again, if you're interested in workshopping your case with us, just send an email to ben@elawvate.net or fill out a case workshop request at elawvate.net. And Rahul and I will look forward to chatting with you soon. Today's episode of Elawvate is brought to you by the Expert Institute. Rahul, you guys use Expert Institute, right?
We do use Expert Institute, and it's fantastic to get different experts in different fields, but the best of the best. And you don't know until you do the research, and they do that all for us.
Today's show is also brought to you by Filevine. Filevine has a platform called Lead Docket, which is the state-of-the-art way of tracking all of your intakes and leads, particularly if you're putting money into advertising. You don't want to waste money by missing a lead or missing a good case. It also doesn't mess up your case management software by keeping it in a different platform just focused on your leads. So check out Lead Docket by Filevine. Also brought to you today by Steno. Steno is a product you've used a lot, Rahul, right?
Steno is fantastic as a court reporting company. In addition to that, if you haven't tried Transcript Genius, it is an AI-based search engine where you can ask it questions such as, with an entire case, all the evidence on negligence, and it'll pull all the deposition testimony from all of the witnesses and put it together in a seamless way with hyperlinks to the actual text. Amazing.
And if your state law allows it, you can also defer the cost of depositions till the end of the case, which is, we were just going through our budget, and transcripts from depositions is in the top 5 of our expense items. So it's worth checking that out. Our show's also brought to you by Smart Advocate. That's the case management software we use at our firm. Our staff loves it. We love it. Very intuitive, very robust, can be adapted to do a lot of different things from mass torts down to small PI firms. So take a look at that. Finally, Hype Legal is the firm that we use for our social media and for our website design and development. We just rolled out our new website about 2 months ago that was designed by Micah and Tyler at Hype Legal. We love it. We've had a lot of great response to it. So if you want to see their work, come to our site at gideonason.com. And if you like what you see, contact Hype Legal and see if they could do the same for you. Welcome to the Elawvate podcast. I'm Ben Gideon. My co-host Rahul is sleeping in today. It's my great pleasure to invite on our podcast today Alexis Garmey Chardon and Terry Garmey, who are father and daughter, also law partners. And Ali is, I think, the heir apparent to the Terry Garmey empire. Terry is one of the top trial lawyers in the state of Maine. He's a member of the Inner Circle. He's had some amazing verdicts. Ali is an incredible trial lawyer in her own right, who recently moved back to Maine from Chicago. I want to go back, Terry, and I don't know if you remember this, but when I moved back to Maine to start practicing law, I went to your office and interviewed with you, but you never offered me a job, so I won't hold that against you. But
at the time, I was doing you a favor. Trust me, I was hoping you would offer me a job at that time.
I came, actually, I invited myself to interview with you more as an informational interview, and I just wanted to meet you because you had such a great reputation as a trial lawyer. And I remember meeting you and thinking, actually, this is what I want to do for a job because you seem to love what you do so much. And I was coming out of big law and at a big law firm in New York City. And, although you didn't have any openings, I didn't expect you to offer me a job. I took from you that you had found a career that you that you loved and really enjoyed, and that has impacted me from that moment forward.
Well, I
I just
appreciate
wanted to
that. And
mention that.
like most things in life, when you're my age, I do have a general memory. And I remember the office. I think I was still on the waterfront at
You
that
were
time.
beautiful
And
office.
yeah, it was. Yeah, I've worked my way down over time. I'm looking at tents now. But first of all, I appreciate you having us on the show. I'm reminded of Groucho Marx's famous quote that normally I don't join organizations that would have me as a member. And for whatever reason, I think you touched upon, I think the one thing I do have to offer, I really love what I do. And I feel lucky to have done it. And if I left you with the impression when you were a young lawyer that I love what I do, that's what I would have wanted. I'm 78 in May and I still come to work. And I think that's all I have to offer is that I speak to those people who are looking for passion. It's here is in the practice of helping people who have been injured. And I found it and I have a hard time giving it up.
It seems like that rubbed off on your daughter because she followed your footsteps. Is that the case, Allie?
It is. But the prodigal daughter, I guess you could say, because like you, I went to big law after law school. It's funny. I grew up in Maine. I had a wonderful childhood and pretty decent parents. And they gave me
1 out of 2 is what she's trying to say.
they gave me the gift of saying wherever you get into college, we'll make sure you get there. And then grad school is on you. You and your sister can pay for your own way. And that gave me debts to repay. And with that, I made a choice that for a long time I regretted and now I've come to see was an important part of my path. I did the responsible thing and went and got a huge paycheck. And I was absolutely miserable for 7 years. Not because I worked at a great firm, and if that's the work I wanted to do, that would have been the place to do it. I really liked and respected the people who owned and ran that firm. But it wasn't me. I was a square peg in a round hole. And I didn't know any lawyers really with whom I was close that liked what they did. It wasn't what I had thought I was getting into because I recalled my father's stories just my whole life. I mean, I was just truly a plaintiff's lawyer's kid, but a happy plaintiff's lawyer's kid. Why I think it's just a very privileged person's way of finding her hardship because I was well compensated. I was paying for 2 kids in daycare, supporting my husband getting a PhD. I had so many comforts, and I'm really grateful for that. Paid off my loans, but I was really truly unhappy. And because of my father's inspiration and the ability to come to begin working with him piece by piece, for a long time, I was working at a contract from Chicago. I was able to make the transition to this world, and I was able to make the very scary decision of moving my entire family and my husband in particular, whose career was in Chicago, back here to work with my dad. And so now I pinch myself every day because I get to do this work and because I have had the experience of knowing what it's like to not feel fulfilled and not feel like you're doing good.
So from a dad's perspective, Ben, Allie's aspirations were so much different than mine. And the decision that she would be responsible for graduate school, I feel a little defensive here, but I really wanted both. I have 2 daughters. And I really have been financially independent almost without exaggeration since I was about 10. I had a paper out and I had it all through high school and had people working for me and was self-funded. And I wanted Allie to have a sense of independence, of feeling that she could control her own destiny. And then as a dad, of course, I love what I do. But I think you're fulfilled if you're with the kind of people that you want to spend time with, right? When Allie was in law school, Ben, I can't tell you the number of people here in Maine who would find out I had a daughter in law school and in a joking way say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Have you tried to talk her out of it? Poor thing." I'm defensive about being a plaintiff's lawyer. I like what I do. I don't like people to make fun of what we do. You know, I might say I broke my nose chasing parked ambulances, but I don't want other people to say that, right? So when Allie got into a very good law school and did well and then clerked, for the First Circuit. She followed that up with a job. And frankly, both of you went to big law. Big law wouldn't have had me. And I think that's true for a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers. You're the outliers, right? And she was, from the moment she got her job. I remember the first conversation. She was given a very good job with a very good firm, and she told me how much she made, and I wasn't trying to diss her, but I said, "Allie, you're not worth that much. I mean, you don't have any experience. How could they possibly pay you that much? You're not worth it." And
You're right.
and so for those 7 years, while I still loved what I had been doing for 40 years, Allie, I would talk to her on the phone, and I thought, geez, I influenced her into this profession, and she's miserable, right? So, I think if you feel good being around people, and I think old people are allowed to be really simplistic in our speech. We get away with it. But it's pretty simple to me. Really like representing people, as Ali and I just did, who work in factories and leave school at 15 and get really good jobs as maintenance people. And when they get injured, it just makes me, I like hanging with them. And I wouldn't have been happy going to lunch with bankers. Nothing wrong with bankers, but that's not me. So when Allie found her calling, I was really happy when she decided to take a courageous step to come back to Maine and give plaintiff's law a try.
And we're going to circle back to that. But Terry, can you give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of your journey to becoming a lawyer and a trial lawyer? Because I know you have one of the more fascinating stories that I've ever heard, and I think our listeners would enjoy hearing about that.
I've had a really lucky life, I feel. I was born into a family where there were not many books. My father did not graduate from high school. I think he was pretty smart. He was an alcoholic. My mom had problems of her own. Her parents immigrated from Italy, and Italian was her primary language. And I was raised in a family where I was told, unlike Allie, who was told as a young girl I would pay for any college she could get into. Unfortunately, she got into some good ones, which really disappointed. But my parents, when I was a freshman in high school, said just the opposite. High school's it, and then you're on your own, and we don't really see a need to think about college for you. And I went through a parochial school system, and the nuns from grade 1 to 8, they didn't get along very well with me. And I wasn't really bad, but I spent probably more of my sixth grade year, Ben, literally in the hallway than I did in the classroom. So I went to high school, and I came under the instruction of a bunch of monks called Christian Brothers. They became role models. They filled in for spots my dad couldn't plug in for me. And at the end of my high school, 2 or 3 days after my senior prom, I joined them. And my friends threw me a party, a surprise party, and I thought I would have to stay long enough so as not to embarrass myself, which I thought would be 6 months. And I was there 4.5 years, including, and Ben, you know me well enough to know how miraculous it was that I spent the first 15 or 18 months in a canonical novitiate where you weren't allowed to talk much, which is just astounding to me. So maybe
You've been making up for it ever
yeah,
since.
I have. So I went from there, Ben. It was a transformative experience. I became a much better student, and I went to a college, LaSalle College, and I volunteered as much as I could at a reform school with really tough kids. They were sent by the courts for very serious offenses like manslaughter. And I started out an English teacher, but back then I was bigger than most English teachers, so
You skipped
they
that.
moved
You
me.
skipped the God Squad. What did you tell them?
Oh yeah, I did play football at LaSalle. I was the first guy as a religious allowed to play on a very bad club football team that traveled around. They got me out of LaSalle until I screwed up my knee. So after 4.5 years into it, I knew this wasn't for me. And I'm not a religious person any longer, Ben, either, but I'd like to think the things I learned in the brothers have stuck to my ribs. But I went from, and the moment my parents learned I was leaving the brothers, which was the only thing I ever did that literally that ever made them happy. Uh, we had a scene like out of The Graduate, where my dad hoped that I would get drafted and go to Vietnam. But I got a job at one of the reform schools I had volunteered at, lived there, finished my college career, became a disc jockey but I would go to school at nights, tried that for 6 months, and learned how to say it's 10 o'clock in Massillon, Ohio. These are the stories making the news at this hour. It's not helped me in the trial. And from there, I found life not satisfying. I wasn't doing what I kind of trained to do, to try to help people that needed help. And I went to Boston. I got a job in a self-help drug clinic, which was a fascinating experience with a guy who taught me more about cross-examination. He was black, Jay Johnson. He became my best friend. He was a football star at BU, sold heroin on the side, was a heroin addict, and brilliant. He became a black Muslim. That kind of destroyed our friendship, as you might expect. And I left the brothers and I met my wife, Mandy, Allie's mom. And shortly about that time, I had no money. I was literally homeless. So she got me a job as a night watchman so I could have a place to sleep on the floor of another drug center. And I promised her I'd find a way to make a living. I started as a psychologist. I thought that would have been awful, I think. Mandy thinks that'd have been okay. I don't think so. So I went to graduate school for a year, and I took somebody to one of the people from the center to trial. He was a black gentleman, and he sold cocaine. And if you're addicted to drugs, you're gonna have to find a way to pay for them, right? And so this line between a user and a seller is, to me, gossamer thin. So he sold. He cleaned up. We had the only, as the first of its kind, hard daycare program where people withdrew from heroin in our program and then went home at night. He did great. He was very handsome. I brought him to court. I said, the judge is going to treat you well. And he said, no, wait till you see. I got to court in Boston, and a public defender showed up with the ponytail. This is 1971, 72, wearing clogs. And this guy who I had promised, you're going to do okay, looked at me with this look like, I told you. And then I watched the worst. I'd never seen a lawyer till then. That was the first time in the courtroom. And I thought at the end of that day, he got a terrible sentence. And I thought, I should do that. And so that's what I decided to do. My third year of law school, I think they can take my license away because you have to, but I had a chance to work as an assistant district attorney during a big murder case. And my third year at BC, I went pretty much to my first class and took my finals and worked full time. So that's the circuitous route. I don't get to talk about it much, but I just feel lucky. I end up in a profession where doing good and doing well don't have to be different. That's not true for most people, but it is for us.
The thing about my dad my dad is my role model, and I just admire him so much. And one of the things about him that's made him so successful is he just started that whole story by saying, I've had a lucky life. And a lot of people would have looked at his childhood. He didn't go into all the details, but a lot of people would not have described their childhood as lucky in that sense. Dad, you've got this way of reframing everything in an optimistic way, and it has brought you success. It's how you conquer. It's the way you see the world to a fault. Sometimes you're wrong, but
I'm not
it's
aware of that.
much better to be wrong this way than the other way. I mean, you just it makes you undefeatable.
And Allie, did you know all of your dad's history growing up, or did you only learn that as you became an adolescent or an adult?
No, so I did. And my dad is an amazing storyteller. And we used to just, first of all, kudos to my mom, because my mom did everything in our lives to make it look like my dad was around all the time. He'd show up, wrestle with us, eat dinner, and tell stories. And that was and help with homework somehow. I don't know how the heck she did it. Because in retrospect, people are telling me, your dad was on trial, you know, all the time. And he never stopped working. And it was not the impression I had. But we would just be I mean, it was just funny and riveting, and we would listen to those stories, and it's pretty cute because I have pictures. Every once in a while, I'll pull out my phone and snap because we still have family dinners now. My sister's back. Like, he's got all 4 grandkids in town. And it's kind of like the Pied Piper, or if you look at him it's almost the Last Supper. All the little kids are leaning towards my dad with their ears, and he's telling the same stories that he told us, and they love it. So I
But
felt,
but her mother's heard him 17
well,
times.
my mother needs to do the dishes.
Yeah.
At some point, you became a trained actor in some fashion, right, Terry?
Well, it's funny. Yes. I
Was that part of your training as a trial lawyer? Or is that separate and independent
No,
from
it's
that?
different. And Ben, I did some radio commercials, and one was nominated for a prize in Maine, and then some photographer from New York said, "You should do commercials. Can I take some photos?" And then I had fun. So I would try cases and then do industrial films or commercials I really like doing voices. I won't do them here.
You do anybody in particular that we would know?
He does everybody.
Oh,
Don't
right.
get him started.
No,
He'll
no,
be
don't
on
get
the
me
hook
started.
the rest of
It'd be terrible.
He's
So
but that
the bottom line is that I think acting teaches you to recognize the defenses people use to hide their true feelings. So if anything, it should lead you to being more approachable and less guarded in the courtroom. So, I wouldn't want somebody to come to one of my trials and say, you can tell, if they said, I can tell you're an actor, I didn't like that. I felt like I'm not acting in the courtroom. It is interesting. For many years at the local high school that Allie attended, Cape Elizabeth, I volunteered to teach extemporaneous speaking. And I got intrigued in that because I had read that for the American male, the number one fear is speaking in front of a crowd of people. I think that's true even till today.
Is that just for males?
I don't think the women in my life have a problem speaking. I don't know.
The women in your life that I know don't seem to have any problem with
No,
it.
no. So I thought if you could
Do you have a fear of speaking, Terry, in any capacity? Are you so well trained as a?
No, I do. And I think I have to come to grips with it. So I do these.
How about you, Ellie? You don't seem to have any fear at all. That's been my experience with you.
I appreciate that. I have a ton of fear. Call it the imposter monster. That we all have. And I think, but I've overcome a lot of it. One way in which I'm very different from my father is I am not a performer. I'm not an actor. His creative, I think it comes from, as he was describing, a very intellectual place, but also just this, I don't know, it's funny. I would have said confidence, but now listening to him talk, I guess it's not that. I don't know where his theatrical impulses come from. I know my sister inherited them. I don't have that. And I think for a long time, I thought that meant that I shouldn't be a trial lawyer. In addition to the fact that it's a high risk profession that was very scary to me for that reason. But anyway, I guess that means a lot to me that you say, I don't think, you think I speak without fear. I'll take it. There is one thing I will say. I did a lot of mock trial through high school with my dad. And then in law school, when I was doing it, the first time I got to sit argue in front of a real jury. And by real jury, I mean a group of high schoolers from Chicago, but real people. I had a feeling I've never had before. And the only time I've ever had since is talking to a jury. And I haven't gotten to do it enough yet. I really like talking to people. And that's how I feel, I surprise myself when I get the chance to do that in court. I surprise myself that I'm not more afraid than I am. I mean, feeling like I want to puke, but luckily I know that my father, who's my favorite trial lawyer, tells me he wants to puke too, so it makes me feel okay. So
it's interesting to examine that fear because I'm come to this point where I don't think all fears are the same. And it's natural to be fearful because you have a client you care about and you really want to help that client and you really believe in his or her cause. But I've been at this a long time, and I've come to recognize that my fear of failure is separate and apart from that fear. And I would like to get a better handle even on that at my age. In other words, the fear that losing a trial proves that my parents were right. I think that for some of us,
I've seen your boat, Terry, and you've proven that they're wrong.
I have a new and bigger boat coming. So,
not that this is a materialistic need, but
I'm calling it my parents were wrong. But the fact is that we each of us need to separate our failure from failure as a person. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I'm an old guy, and still that plagues me. There's one trick I learned a long time ago that seems so silly, but I've been doing it for 45, 48 years, and I still do it. Even like the moment that I have to give a closing or open, I feel the energy of my fear. And then I reflect back on some time where I did a courageous thing. When to me, it's one event in high school. And I think about it for a few seconds right before an opening statement. It seems like a gimmick, but it puts me in a place, if I can recollect, that there was a time when I was fearful. I took an action that took some guts, and I turned out all right. I'm still here.
What was it?
I stood up to a school bully in McDonald's, and it would be a much better story if I beat him up. But the fact is, I was terrified. He was bigger than me, and so I reflect on that moment, and I think, well, there's a bully here, and it's bigger than me too, and I've done okay. So reflecting on your successes, I think trial lawyers, it's okay. Many good trial lawyers feel like they've got something to prove. That's just my naked observation, and that's okay. But you got to remember what's a tail and what's a dog here. I feel like I've got too much to prove, and I'm an old man. I do have a boat, you know.
Take your playbook to the next level by joining a legal network of all-stars at psrplaybook.com. psrplaybook.com is a free digital legal library created exclusively for plaintiff lawyers by the nationally recognized personal injury law firm of Panish Shea Ravipudi LLP, and features video content showcasing the tactics, strategies, and concepts implemented by some of the industry's most successful trial attorneys. psrplaybook.com promotes learning, shared knowledge, collaboration, and best practices. Get in the game and see for yourself by joining our national network of plaintiff lawyers. Subscribe now at psrplaybook.com and learn from the best.
What's been consistent and the same over the time you've been trying cases, and what do you think has changed over time? Because Allie and I are closer in the same generation. We only know what we've seen since we've started, but I'm curious, kind of, is it the same as it's always been, or
No,
things
it's
changed?
not, Ben. That's a good question. I think you are disadvantaged by the fact, and I do have some very few cases outside Maine, but most of my practice is Maine-based. You two have to confront the fact that judges are now imbued with the spirit that if you don't settle your case at a mediation or at a settlement conference, that you've let the system down, right? And they have criminalized risk. I've heard them tell young lawyers, you're going to take the risk of this case? You could lose this case. When I was really, really young, I did 2 high-lows because the judges told me I had no chance, all right? And I listened to the judges, and in both those high-lows, I got huge verdicts and lost the case, right? So, but in my day, you settle your case, you don't settle your case, you didn't feel from the pressure from the bench that you're wasting the court's time because a case that could have settled is now going to occupy a jury. So I think, I don't know how you young people feel. I'd be interested, but compulsory mediation's okay. But more and more young people are having a hard time walking away from an offer, I think, in my experience.
Allie, what's your experience on that?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's not helping us in Maine. That's taking us so long to get to trial, right? I've had to settle a lot of cases lately just simply because my clients are so old that it would be selfish of me not to. That's frustrating. But I think we had the Maine Trial Lawyers Association annual meeting. You were missed, Ben, last Friday or a couple weeks ago. And I just love talking to my dad and all of his peers. There are so many war stories. Look, they have more war stories than we'll ever have because they tried everything and they were doing workers' comp. And my dad's firm at the time did defense and It was a real traditional old school firm. You've probably tried a family law case, Dad. I don't even know, but
Couple.
yeah, he's tried everything. And that sort of experience you can't replace. I do, and I don't think I'll ever have it. And look, it's okay. I also really wanted to be a mom and have my kids and have a steady, secure little nest before I did this crazy eat what you kill work. So there's that. But I guess I'm just really grateful I have my dad and Gary Goldberg around in my office. I don't know what I'd do without them, because the experience that they have, the not just the legal expertise, but it's a deep understanding of human beings and juries that comes from trying case after case after case after case is totally irreplaceable. So what's the solution for that? I don't know. I'm trying to jump on everybody's trial I can get. I'm really lucky that I have some really fantastic law partners that are high volume, who Chris Harmey's been very generous, and he's got a lot of trials, and so he brings me aboard. I do feel, and maybe it's important that I think about what my dad just said, keep a check on this feeling, but I do feel I have something to prove, right? Because I need to try a bunch more cases, but also something to learn. And also what we don't remember, I think those of us who are in this come up in this world, is how many times clients are happy when you lose because you gave them a shot. And that's happened lately, even in the past 5 years. Some of my partners have lost trials or gotten small verdicts and had their clients hug them and say, "Thank you so much for doing this for me." And that means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, lawyers give folks with no voice a voice. And when Ali mentions that losing a case isn't the worst thing in the world if the client gets to tell her story for the first time, right? And the only time. And if she feels it's heard. Another thing that may have changed, and I'm interested in your perspective, for the first 40 years, 45 years of my practice, there was a general respect for the courts. And so when you entered a courtroom, it became my church, right? Or my synagogue. It became the holy place, right? And jurors came in imbued with the spirit that judges were special people, and they tried to rise above their prejudices. And when you see the corrosive effect of constant diminishment of the judicial system and the judicial branch, I just wonder, I think it's too early to really know. I mean, there's some really huge verdicts, including one $3 billion that just came down, I know, in civil cases. But it's hard for me to imagine that the constant attack on the judicial system doesn't demean every courtroom. I don't know what we do about that. When we see big law firms volunteer $40 million worth of their very precious skill and work to support issues that nobody thinks they believe in, I don't know, what's that do to us as a profession? You and Ali, Ben, I think, have generational problems to confront that I'm lucky. I feel lucky I didn't have to.
I will say I feel very, it's a very scary world right now. I feel privileged and entitled that I have a law license and can try a jury case, because I deeply believe that the threat of having 9 or 11 human beings judge their behavior is potentially the only thing that can keep corporations in check right now. And I do think that jurors, in my experience, take their role so incredibly seriously. And it's a beautiful thing. And to that end, it's almost like a civic duty for us lawyers that we keep trying cases, including small cases, I think trying to figure out, Ben, how we can get more prisoner cases lined up after they survive summary judgment pro se for trial lawyers like us to just take on and just bring them from summary judgment to trial, just because the more human beings that cycle through that jury pool, I can hope the more they understand how critical it is.
Yeah, we definitely live in some fraught and scary times, and I think we could have another podcast or many to address these issues. And I share your concerns about them. And the second item you referenced is more specific to Maine, I think, because we have cases in other jurisdictions where the courts actually function reasonably well. and cases get moved and trial dates get set. And that just isn't happening in our home state. And that has to do with a variety of things, including budgets and priorities and other problems. But it's a real problem in our state. We see our colleagues going to trial more often and getting verdicts in other states. We can't even get trial dates in our state. So it's very frustrating. Terry, over the course of your time and having tried all of those cases for many, many years, if you were talking to newer, younger lawyers who are just getting their start and trying to impart some of the big picture takeaways or wisdom from that experience, what are kind of some of the top lessons you would tell them? And as an aside, we know you're a very funny person, and I've seen you do kind of these humor things. Do you bring humor into the courtroom at all?
Yeah, I think too much when I was young. I do. Yeah. Sometimes I was funny, didn't mean to be. I think humor is appropriate in the courtroom, but looking for the laugh, forcing a laugh isn't good. And I think I had to really moderate that. I tried a case in Boston when I was a really young lawyer. I couldn't refer out. I did okay. And a few weeks later, a lawyer from Boston, who I know, a defense lawyer, said, I saw the federal judge and he said, you did a good job, but he's got to drop that down home act. Right. And I had, I think, mimicked Charlie Smith a little too much. And so learning to be yourself is the important thing. I guess the lesson that I would try to impart to a young lawyer is choose your clients wisely. If you really, to me at least, the secret to what I've been able to accomplish is I really fall in love with my clients, right? And there are some professions where I think you needn't do that. But if you're a plaintiff's lawyer and you're going to put yourself on the line, you want to do that for a client that you really care about. I think you need to find the simple story. And I'm trying to think of a way to express that. I remember, yeah, I was terrified in my first big products case, a guy who lost his arm. And there were signs all over the machine that said, don't put your arm in there. I mean, like 100 of them. And he was cleaning the machine, put his hand in, lost his arm. And I couldn't figure out, I was terrified of trying that before the case started in federal court. And I was looking through an old 1954 safety book, and in its own engineering language, it said, people are subject to hunger, thirst, boredom, headache, but machines are the same day after day. And that really became, once I found that simple story, that was the story. The machine never changed. It didn't get cold. It didn't get wet. Scott did, right? And so finding a simple there, and all of our cases have a simple truth somewhere, and you have to find the simple truth. Believe in the simple truth, and don't overstate. Don't have to do that. And I also think, Machiavelli said you have two choices with your enemy: embrace or annihilate. I prefer to be an embracer, believe it or not. I've seen, and there was a very effective plaintiff's lawyer. You know who really good, and a great criminal lawyer, and both of you know who he is, but he's dead, and I needn't use his name. He was an annihilator. Yeah. Okay. He never found a doctor he liked, right? We know who he was. And so I tried a case with him once for 3 weeks, and that was his style, right? And he got wonderful verdicts sometimes. But you don't need to do that. Ultimately, if a jury doesn't believe that good people make big mistakes and how to pay for those big mistakes, you're going to lose. Right? You don't have to prove that somebody's bad. So don't put the ball in play. I don't have many secrets. Ben, I wish I did.
Those are some powerful ones just in and of themselves. It makes me think and question some things.
I've really appreciated that. You do have a lot of you don't keep them secret, you share them, but there's a lot of wisdom in there, and I've really appreciated that attitude that you've embraced more and more as you've gotten older, Dad. I mean, we've joked that certain deposition conduct from opposing counsel would have ended in fisticuffs 30
Right.
years ago with you, and you've just diffused
Yeah.
it so gracefully with humility. It's incredible, but I've appreciated it because I think for me as a woman, it has been, I think I had this image, first of all, that I had to be just as clever, just as fast, just as theatrical as my dad, and I'm not. I'm just different. But that I had to have an aggression that isn't natural to me. And I've always felt like my mentors here, my father and Gary and everybody has just genuinely let me be who I want to be and let that become effective in its own right. And it helps me sleep at night. And because it's a scary profession. I've been talking a lot about how it's risk and how it's eat what you kill. I don't want to give the wrong impression that it wasn't terribly courageous for me to join this firm. It wasn't terribly courageous for me to switch sides. I took a huge pay cut, which I've now made up for. There was no pampering, but I had such an opportunity to be able to work with my dad and know that I could, rely on him and rely on his name and reputation. People, judges recognize me because of my dad. I really admire people, and there's so many of them, and I met a bunch of women with this backstory at the last, conference of your plaintiffs conference I went to, who have made that jump without the kind of support that I had.
Well, I want to point out it was important for me to make it clear to Allie that what she had here was an opportunity, but I think if you ask the young lawyers in this office, there was no intention on my part to make it any easier, to bend any rules, to make Alex's life easier here than it was for any other associate. That would have been unfair to her and unfair to them. So the move, because she did take a huge pay cut, it was scary for me and I made it really clear, there are no guarantees here. What you have is an opportunity. Let me say one thing
Can
about.
I just, before you
Yep.
finalize that, Allie is an absolute rock star, Terry. And if you hadn't hired her, we would have hired her
I know.
in a second.
It's the only
So,
reason. It's the only reason
and,
I get.
and we'll pay her more than you're paying her
I'm
right
sure you
now.
will.
So yeah, I just
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I knew you would, and that's why I hired her, Ben. No, I hear you. Let me say one thing that I think hopefully the audience might be hearing now. We all benefit from the fact that Maine only has 1 million people. It's a small bar. And those of us who have licenses in other big states like Illinois and Massachusetts, which we do, we know that in a larger bar, bad behavior can be buried, right? Because you try a case with Joe or Josephine and you never see her again, right? So she can be a total jerk. In Maine, we have the benefit of having a state where your reputation is well known, not as to whether or not you're an effective trial lawyer, but what kind of person you are. Can you be trusted? Are you going to get in these crazy arguments in front of the jury and demean your opposition? And we know who those lawyers are, and they do exist, right? But for the rest of us, our behavior is moderated by the fact that our reputation precedes us. I just feel so lucky to practice law in a state like Maine. It is really terrible, especially as you get older and there's a warranty on a timestamp on your product. You want to get these cases to trial, and we share that angst. But otherwise, as a place to practice law, we have judges that, by and large, really try to do their best, right? They let you try your case once you get there. And we have lawyers that still treat the process with dignity and almost all you can trust. And I don't think that's true everywhere, as I see other lawyers from other states. I don't know about your experiences, but
no, I share that. I think there's a trade-off between efficiency and economic opportunity and what you just described, which is a quality of life and having the ability to have a satisfying, enjoyable career in a way that makes you feel good and you can raise your family and have a nice balance. And I think we do have that in our state, despite all the frustrations that come with trying to make a living practicing law here, which is a good transition to the future. So what's on the horizon for you guys? Where are you going from here? And what are you looking forward to down the road?
You don't ask a 78-year-old what's on the horizon.
That one was directed more to Allie.
Okay, so I'm going to let her answer it. Yeah.
Look, I'm itching. I have one regret left. Well, got a lot of stuff to check off, but I haven't had a jury trial with my dad yet. We've had a bench trial, which we proudly tried this
COVID.
Mid-COVID, we did a bench trial in the Circuit Court of Cook County from our war room here in Portland, Maine, because I had just moved from Chicago back. And that was really, really a cool experience. We've done a lot together, but we haven't tried a jury trial. If we can get, we've got a couple, we're waiting for dates. If we can get them, I'm going to have them in the same hearing aids that those great sets that the jurors get. Because as we joke, I mean, old Terry is still like 150% of young any one of us.
No, it's not true.
So we,
I wish
And
so.
also, there's no way anyone would think he's 78. I mean, you seem like a 65-year-old, really.
Well.
I mean, it's you
It's
look
nice of you to
great.
say.
You're very fit, and I don't see any evidence of an aging decline, at least from my perspective. But
I will say that, as we all know, the work we do is extraordinarily tiring. And because I have I feel bad for my sister sometimes because I get to have so much quality time day by day, hour by hour with my dad. Although, to his credit, when he goes home and his grandkids are around, work is off. But there's a season in all of our careers, and my dad and I are so, so fortunate that we get to work together in these different seasons. So I hope that it continues to be more and more of what it is now, which is, my son Louis needs to get to Little League and we've got a brief due. And I look at my dad and I say, will you take him to Little League? And that's exactly what my dad wants to do. And I'm finding it so luxurious that I get to stay and work till 9 and not worry about it. Dad will take him to Little League. Even when my husband's working in Chicago, my mom will feed him. And there's a lot of little stuff that, when your daughter's ready to think about what she wants to do, send her my way, Ben, and I can help
she
gently.
occasionally listens to the podcast, and I
Yeah,
suggest
gently.
I'm gonna have her
I
listen to
can
this
provide some
episode.
feedback, and it may be that you do what I do. When you've got big shoes to fill, you may want to go do something else for a while, so that when you come and finally works out, I think I needed that. As unhappy as I was, I think I needed it. There's just little stuff you can't replace. Like, my father taught me how to write, right, along with my mom. But I mean, he taught me how to write. He taught me how to think, and so, boy, is it easy for us to write a brief together. I write the whole thing because that's the work that he's entitled to not do anymore. And then he comes in with this, brush strokes, and writes the perfect introduction. But he's already told me how to frame. He's already thought of the nuggets, and that's all he has to do. He just sits down and he expounds on the way he views a case. It blows my mind, and then I do the legwork. And to have that is incredible.
Well, I appreciate that, but let me disabuse anybody of the notion that you're the same at 78 as you are at 50 or 55. You're just not. If I didn't think I could still represent a client well, Allie and the others here have promised me if they see me talking to the coat rack, they're going to let me know.
If that happens
But-
again.
Yeah, it happens again. So the fact is, we share the ambition of trying a case together. I've really wanted to do a jury trial with Allie, and it's been so frustrating we can't get these cases. And the case that I think has the best chance is one of those cases where we may not get a big verdict, but it's really a story that the clients have been. It's righteous. It's a righteous case, and it ought to be told. And whether we get a verdict or not, we want to give platform to what these poor folks have gone through. And so, and if I could do that and do it in a courtroom with Allie, where, by the way, I'm comfortable being second fiddle. I just was invited by Peter Richards. By the way, I work for them now. I try to be the best associate they have. It's a tough competition because Gary Goldberg and some two wonderful young lawyers are competing. But I've agreed to try a case with him in June if that gets to the courtroom. And I'll be a second fiddle there too. That's okay. Allie mentioned doing something after college. You may not want your daughter to hear this, Ben, but I advocated that for both of my kids, and I did it. I think when I was in the Brothers, occasionally I got to slop pigs. I got to fix a ton of toilets. I got to do all kinds of dirty work for several years. It makes being a trial lawyer like a miracle. Like, oh my God, I could make money doing this.
Yeah, my college job, remember mine? I was an assistant for a disabled man with cerebral palsy, and I would take the bus That's how I got my beer money.
Yeah. And believe me, she needed a lot of money for beer. She had to work overtime.
But I mean, that was very different from, and I also worked on farms. That was different work, but it was service work, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed him and all of that. But to be able to have a helping job where you're getting paid to think, I mean, what a luxury.
Yeah. I
What a
mean,
luxury.
yeah, I like to say, and I'm sure others have said it better, but we're in a profession where we rob from the rich, give to the poor, and keep just enough for Robin and the merry men, right? And you look at that and say, is that possible? And again, I get back to this, and I don't want to sound trite, but there's doing well, accumulating things and having the money to send your daughter to a good college, and doing good, having something that gives you traction in life. And what I find, most of my friends have retired, and many of them are jealous that I am open about it, that I have something. They're better at playing the guitar and fishing and have
We're
very
a lot
worthwhile
better at
hobbies.
fishing, Dad, but that's
Yeah.
not because they're retired.
But the reality is, it's fortunate to have an opportunity to help one, even if it's one person at a time. It's something, right? And in this world where we are now, where outside the courtroom, I feel I have no power. Exercising what power you do have to help somebody and to get paid to do it is, we're lucky. And we ought not to lose that sense.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. And I share Ali's view, Terry, that you do have such a great quality of optimism. And I find hearing from you is inspirational. I hope it'll be inspirational to the other folks who are listening, because this is a very difficult and stressful job. We are in difficult times, but having that perspective is so valuable. And I do share both of your feelings that I wake up every day feeling fortunate that we get to do what we do for a living. And so thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us.
Thank you, Ben. And
Really
I've reconsidered. And if you'd like a job, give me a call.
If you when you guys try your jury trial, I hope you'll let me know, and we can
will. Yeah,
talk about that again.
Yeah. And
thank you so much, Ben. It's my dad. It just means a lot to me to have this opportunity here from my dad in this forum, because he's got a lot to share. So I really want to thank you. This was super kind of you to invite us.
Have your daughter call Allie. Okay.
I will.
All right. Thanks, Ben.